Donald Trump will return to power with an army of MAGA loyalists ready to hit the ground running to implement his agenda. They have planned for this moment, and unlike last time, Team Trump is more organized and prepared to reshape the federal government so they can achieve their goals. But when it comes to the economy, an issue that voters consider their top priority, they'll face the same economic pressures that shaped the last year of the Biden administration. Joining us now, Mike Needham, chairman at American Compass, a conservative think tank focused on the economy. He's also the former chief of staff to Florida Senator Marco Rubio.
You know, I mean, Mike, we're going to talk about the economy, but I'm very interested. Do you think Marco Rubio is going to join the administration? And if so, are you going with Marco Rubio? I know you just left the senator, but are you going back?
I have no idea. That's a conversation for President Trump and Marco to have. I haven't talked to Marco, and I'm sure President Trump will make a great choice.
All right.
So, okay.
It's giving pivot and go.
Right, pivot and go. Welcome. Glad to have you at the table. One of the things that your group has been focused on, American Compass, is the economy and sort of developing policy around that in the think tank space. So I guess out of the boxes, that was such an incredibly important pivot for a lot of voters, as we were just talking before. Voters who were aligned to vote for reproductive health in their states on ballot initiatives, then voted for Trump on the economy. So given all of that, and given what we've seen from the Biden's agenda, what should Trump do differently to address inflation, which is now 2.1%, not 9.1% as it once was? Gas prices, the cost of eggs, all those things that voters said are so upside down for them. What is Trump going to do to bring down those prices, grocery prices, and make housing costs, which is another big issue for a lot of Americans, cheaper?
Well, I think what you're actually see is an administration that comes in and recognizes that since the end of the Cold War, we have had a failed economic consensus in this country. We've bought into the idea that the only identity that people have is that of a consumer. We've forgotten that they're members of communities, that they're workers, that their job matters. And so the post-war consensus, which has existed in both parties, has been that globalization is a complete good, that we can ship jobs overseas, and as long as we get cheap stuff back, people will be thriving. That completely uncontrolled mass migration into this country is a good thing, with no regards to what it does to the social services in our communities, no regards to what it does to the wages of American workers, no regards to what it does to the cohesion of our community. That the only type of education that matters is four-year education, going to college and sitting at a desk, as opposed to the trades and apprenticeships. And that is the economic assumption that we have to question, that we have to roll back. Donald Trump just had a realignment election. You see that the rich, the people who went to college, people over $100,000 voted for Kamala Harris. People under $30,000 in annual income voted for Kamala Harris. The middle class and the working class, the people who have been most harmed by the failed neoliberal economic policy consensus, voted for Donald Trump. And you're going to have a policy agenda that fights for...
Just as a quick follow-up on that, but what does that look like? Because Donald Trump was not specific about...
He was specific on a lot of things. He said that he loves tariffs. I think if you look...
So tariffs are going to bring my egg prices down and my grocery bill down?
Tariffs might help you get a job. So tariffs might help you get a job that can help you afford those things. If you go back to the year 1984...
So imposing a tax on consumer goods that come into the country is going to help me how?
Giving American producers the opportunity to have jobs that can give American workers jobs that allow... If you go back to 1984, the average worker could afford in 40 weeks of work out of a 52-week year the basics of raising a household. Today, it's 62 weeks in that same 52 weeks. The American worker cannot afford, based on the wages he's getting...
How much time does that take?
62 weeks.
No, but I'm saying how much time for him to do that? I mean, because that's going to take some time for that to work through the system.
Well, I think you saw a lot of progress in the first term with the tariffs. Actually, they were so successful that President Biden expanded some of those. And I think you're going to see President Trump come in, use the tariff agenda. As he said, it's the most beautiful word in the English language. Maybe a little bit of an overstatement, but
I'll cede the table. But go ahead.
I guess my question, well, one, I will just note, I think that in the conversation about working class, they're so interesting because there are a number of surveys. Goldman Sachs did one during the election, and they asked Black women who were like middle managers, upper, and even some upper level managers, and they all felt that they were living paycheck to paycheck. And since the election, I've been talking to people and asking people like, well, who is working class? And if you ask a lot of people, many people view themselves as working class, but I feel like when we talk about it, we're not taking like additional people of color, like black people, into account on that. But when we go to the economy, I guess the thing about the tariffs is interesting. You talk many of the things you said. I used to work in the Biden administration the first year, and it makes me think about the jobs that have been created in these 4 years when Biden has been president. Number of manufacturing jobs that have come back to the country. Many of these effects won't be felt until next year, when now President-elect Trump, then President Trump, will be in office. So how is what you are saying much different than some of the specific things that the Biden administration has done? Because they had a real focus on the trades, because that was one of the things that the president felt, that there was too much focus on four-year colleges and not enough on additional jobs like electricians and plumbers, where you can make really great money, and you always gonna need an electrician. So how is what you're saying different than large pieces of what Joe Biden has done?
Well, I think that the Biden administration got a lot of that stuff caught up into all sorts of unrelated cultural issues. So the CHIPS Act, which was something that was, I think, successful broadly, is an idea that Senator Cornyn first introduced in the Senate many years before Joe Biden was elected president. That's good industrial policy. We need to be able to make semiconductors in this country. We can't afford to lose that industry to China. When it was implemented, they ran around torturing companies, saying, well, if you don't have on-site childcare at your semiconductor manufacturer, you're not going to get chips.
I'm sorry, I lied. I didn't know childcare was a cultural issue. I think people need to be able to have somewhere to take their children while they're at work.
and that's a fine policy belief. It has nothing to do with the industrial policy around semiconductors. And so I think the ability of the Biden administration to interject cultural policy into all sorts of unrelated things was a drawback to that. But we need to have industrial policy. I'm glad that the CHIPS Act was implemented, and we need a lot more of it, because we need to find a way to go for working-class Americans, middle-class Americans, the people who are the backbone of the industrial strength of this country, and make sure they have opportunities to succeed in a global marketplace that right now is being dominated by an adversarial, mercantilist country in China.
So, Mike, good morning to you. You talked about mass migration, so I do want to talk about the president's mass deportation plan. I care about the human toll. I understand not everybody does. I think there are a lot of folks who are worried about what this is going to mean for our economy, both in terms of the price tag, what this is going to cost. You've heard President Trump say there is no price tag on mass deportation, but also the cost of the labor that would be lost. I've read your paper and how you talk about the desire to make a job that Americans don't want to do, a job that Americans do want to do by increasing the wages. A lot of your answer comes down to automating some of those jobs. For the jobs that cannot be automated in dairy, in meat packing, in construction, in ag, how are you going to explain to American workers, how do you take the additional cost? Is that then that profits are cut into by industry, or do you pass that additional cost onto the consumer?
Well, many of these industries are very profitable, and so if there's a cut into some profits in favor of American workers being able to have a wage that supports a family, I'd support that. But I would challenge the premise of your question. A lot of these jobs in ag that can't be automated, in the state of Florida, we have a large strawberry industry, cherry tomatoes. Those are allegedly things that machines can't pick. And actually, there's been tremendous benefit in that. Look, over the last 4 years, we've had nearly 10 million people flood this country. The idea that that's just a status quo that has to be lived with, and President Trump is not correct to be able to say, look, we shouldn't have let these people come in. It's too many people for our country to be able to absorb too quickly. We have the highest level of foreign-born people in the United States in the history of the country, but asking them to leave isn't allowed is kind of silly. It's not just a one-way ratchet where when Democrats are in control, people get to flood our country, and then when Republicans are in control, we just sit on our hands. Many of these people came in through a program called temporary protected status. I don't think it's cruel or in any way inhumane to enforce the temporary part of temporary protected status.
I'd like to shift a little bit from the economy, because you worked for Marco Rubio and the senator's very well-known position on Ukraine and what's happening there in Europe. I'd like to play very quickly for you some sound from Donald Trump talking about settling the Ukrainian war.
But the question here is, would you give Ukraine weapons and funding if you were elected?
I would sit down. Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in 1 day, 24 hours.
How would you settle that war in 1 day?
Because I'll meet with Putin. I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over. It'll be absolutely over.
Do you want Ukraine?
Okay, I'll set aside the idea that it's going to be settled in 24 hours. But there are a lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate who are not aligned with the president on Ukraine. How do you see narratively and geopolitically Trump navigating those Republicans like Marco Rubio, who are on the record strongly supporting Ukraine, and in the face of, the reality that Trump really has much more of an alignment on this issue with Putin than he does with, U.S. senators and Republicans?
Well, I think that's a ridiculous way to frame the issue. Look, everybody agrees.
Why is that ridiculous?
That President Trump has more alignment with Putin?
Yes, because he is saying some of the, and I think he says that because Donald Trump has said some of the same things Putin has said about letting Russia keep some of Ukraine. So that's why he said that. So why do you think that's
so the number one
ridiculous?
geostrategic challenge that the United States faces, that the world faces right now, is a mercantilist country in China that is a cancer on the world system. Everybody going back to the Obama administration has said we need to pivot to Asia. The Trump administration said we need to pivot to Asia. The Biden administration says we need to pivot to Asia. Right now, the war in Ukraine is a gigantic use of resources, of weapons. We're running low on weapons that are critical to be able to actively deter China from going across the Taiwan Strait. We need to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. President Trump is correct about that. That's going to be a negotiated settlement. It's absurd to think.
He's going to give Donbass and those territories that were.
Do you think that Ukraine should be able to retake the Crimea? Is that a realistic war?
Since it was taken from them, yes.
So we should.
Since they were invaded, yes.
And so we should be supporting the Ukrainians.
We should be supporting an ally.
All the way until they retake the Crimea, even if that keeps us totally distracted from China. Allows China to go across the Taiwan.
Can I just say something?
We can do
we live in a world.
Mike,
well, we can't. That's actually what the Washington establishment says. We can walk and we can chew gum at the same time.
They say we're out of time.
We can't do
but
that. We have to choose.
I think real things are happening in Ukraine and Russia as we speak right now. 50,000 troops. Russia has amassed 50,000 troops without having to take any troops out of Ukraine. These are North Korean troops that are now training. They're training for a counteroffensive to take back parts of Russia that Ukraine has captured because they've made inroads into the region. You say, should, Ukraine be able to, take back Crimea? And I guess to bring it home for the American people, this would be like if Mexico popped up and said, we want Texas back. And it's like, Texas is America. What are y'all talking about? And if the Mexican government took parts of Texas, and would you react kindly to one of our allies saying, well, you just need to let some of them keep it?
We do not live in the unipolar moment anymore. This is not the 1990s. If America doesn't choose, if America doesn't prioritize, a very dangerous world is going to end up with the United States being supplanted.
So just one quick question. So you would let Mexico keep parts of Texas?
I think we could handle Mexico, and we will handle Mexico. Right now, if this...
All right, Texas, y'all better watch out.
Mike is going to lead y'all. Mike is going to let the ground go. Let the ground go in pursuit of China. Mike Needham, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.